Well, that's a look outside right now. Of course, I keep getting a bunch of windows overlaid there. I wish I could pipe that feed directly to the channel, but just clear skies here, and we're looking at 80 degrees. And I had to kind of put the show together in a hurry, so I don't have the usual title card on here, but let's go ahead and move on and take a look at the charts here. There we go. There's Irma. That's the big story, heading out towards the Puerto Rico area. And we can see a little bit of an eye in that storm. However, at this time, we're looking at a Category 4 storm. So definitely a pretty good intensity there. And sustained winds up to 140 miles an hour. And earlier today, we were seeing 944 millibars there on the track when the recon planes were out there. And now we're just down to 943 there. Haven't kept up on the storm this afternoon, but let's see, that's 8 p.m. Maybe there's an eye wall replacement cycle. In any case, it is heading westward at 11. And the big thing that we're looking for later on is towards the weekend, when it gets out into the Florida and Bahamas and Cuban area. For the time being, we've got a major pattern shift. We finally got Harvey out of the picture, and this is the theta and winds. So this gives us a very good picture of that frontal system that's sinking south. And we saw that there was a ridge covering this entire area of the North Plains yesterday, and consequently, because of that ridge, we haven't seen much surface development. So all we've got is just kind of a density current spreading southward, not really any well-defined low-pressure area. So leading edge of the front, roughly from about Detroit down to St. Louis, just passing Wichita and Alva, and coming up into the higher terrain of Colorado. Looks like it is kind of breaking through some of the higher peaks of southwestern Wyoming, so it does have some depth, it appears. However, it is hung up in the mountains of western Montana right there. So that's the location right there, and we'll see that continuing, pushing, looks like southward. It does have a south push on that, and it will spread to the southeast also. So we're going to be looking forward to that cool air coming south, and hopefully we'll see more of this coming in a few weeks here. Let's see what's going on across the continental United States right now. We've been pretty distracted with Harvey, but wow, look at all that smoke. There's a ton of it there, and we can see it a little bit better since we have clear skies. We should be able to resolve that very well with the aerosol optical depth, and let's see if that comes through. Yeah, look at that. Good grief. That's going to be centered on, looks like Kansas and Nebraska. Would be interesting to get a webcam out of there, but we can trace that smoke all the way back to Washington and Oregon, and that appears to be one of the sources of the fires there, and it's spreading with the prevailing westerlies all the way out towards Detroit and Chicago and Toronto, so probably some hazy skies in that area. And this is probably more smoke than I've ever seen in the central U.S. Very spectacular there. Actually, I take that back. Late 88, the Yellowstone fires, we had a very similar picture with the smoke coming all the way down into the southern plains there. With the leading edge of that front pushing through the Midwest, we've got a slight risk. A few thunderstorm watches all the way from Detroit down to Indianapolis and all the way to St. Louis. And we can pull that up on the GR Level 2 product. And there it is. Looks like at this time, though, not much severity on these storms. They look very multicellular. So we zoom way down on that. There are a few areas of high intensity, getting into the 60 dBz range. But overall, we don't see that very strong reflectivity gradient on the inflow side of these storms. So it looks like the main threat with these, likely hail and at least moderate-sized hail and maybe some gusty winds as these pass through. .500 millibar pattern. Let's check that out. Looking at the hemispheric plot. A few days ago, we saw that ridging across the western plains, and that's the reason we don't have much baroclinic development along that cold front. And now we're getting into kind of a northwesterly flow pattern there. So the strongest baroclinicity looks to be in the Great Lakes area, the western Midwest, where these height lines come very close together. And that paints out a very well-defined polar front jet from Yukon up to the Northwest Territories, arcing back down to Iowa, then across the northern plains. And looks to me like maybe the subtropical jet may not be very active. This is only 500 millibars, but we'll take a look at that and see if that's a factor today. Okay, so there's the 250, but sometimes we do have to go up to 200 millibars to find a subtropical jet. And yeah, actually we do find it. And there it is in the Great Lakes area, running from Monterey across the middle of the Gulf to Tampa. So if you've got flights running from Tampa and Miami to San Antonio and Houston, a little bit of headwind bringing down the block times on those flights. Some ridging across the central plains, and we've got kind of a tropical upper tropospheric trough extending southwestward through Texas like that. And there's those very strong northwesterly winds in the northern plains. And we can see that a little bit better on the Canadian analysis. There it is, and typically when we have very strong winds on the west side of the trough like this, that's kind of a pattern that we associate with deepening of the trough. Because when you think of it, there's more mass, or more, I guess a better way to describe it, there's more velocity coming into the back of the trough than going out, and that's going to tend to kind of dig the trough. So we're going to be looking for maybe a little bit of deepening, a little bit of amplification of that trough over the next day or two. 700 millibar pattern, just a kind of a reflection of the upper level winds. You can see a little bit of maybe a shortwave troughing in the Lake Superior, Minnesota area, and a bit of shortwave ridging across New York. So probably a little bit of clearing up in the northeast U.S. right now. Wind flow pretty weak in Texas all the way up to the western U.S. So any storms that go up in this area likely to not be very organized. And then at 8:50 we can check on the return moisture. So are we looking at dew points or dew point depression? Well, up in this area we've got very high numbers for the lower left part of the plot. So that's very likely to not be dew point. That's going to be dew point depression. So basically the higher the number, the lower the relative humidity and the lower the dew point. So that's indicating the dry air coming out of the northern plains. And then the lower numbers, those are going to indicate the higher relative humidity coming out of the western Gulf. So we're getting a little bit of return flow out of the Gulf, kind of as we would expect on the western periphery of the Bermuda High here. And the only thing is the wind velocities are on the weak side, just 10 to 15 knots in most places. Okay, then our visible satellite imagery, well, it's starting to look dark now that we're just a couple weeks away here from fall. But bringing up the imagery that we do have, well, we can see plenty of that smoke up in the northwestern U.S. There it is right there. Looks just socked in there. Would be spectacular seeing that out of an airplane window. Probably just look like a solid veil of smoke. And then down in the southwest U.S., not as subject to that smoke down there, still getting a little bit of the monsoon pattern. Pretty high tops there. Just west of the Mogollon Rim, around the Kingman and Prescott area. And a couple of other tops in the Tucson region. And then in the Mojave Desert, a few storms active in that region. And then you get up into the San Joaquin Valley, and we do pick up that smoke in that area there. Texas is clear, however. And we can take a look at the soundings. Fort Worth tonight, showing a lot of dry air aloft, just north winds and a little bit of warm air in the mid-levels. Elsewhere around the country, ahead of that cold front, Wilmington, Ohio. We really wish we had a skew T around Indianapolis. Could use a couple more soundings in that area, but there it is. We can see a little bit of a loaded gun profile. Looks like the cap is centered at about 750 millibars, which is going to be about 8,000 feet. So that's helping to keep a little bit of compression of a little bit of suppression of the deeper convective elements until we get max heating. And definitely some very good moisture there. If we average that layer, we're getting probably about 14 grams per kilogram of moisture. That's right off by these purple lines. And that would tell me probably dew points in the mid to upper 60s. So with that kind of moisture, we can definitely squeak out a few thunderstorms as long as we can clear the cap. But there is a lot of capping there at Wilmington. Wind flow, though, is a little bit on the weak side. Mid-level winds only 30 knots out of the west. And the upper-level winds, not too impressive, but as we've seen, there are higher velocities coming in from the west. However, I don't think those are going to make it into the area now that we're losing heating. Okay, let's put up the... Let me put up the infrared imagery here. Yeah, maybe I can zoom that out, and we can take a look at Irma here. I guess we'll run about 20 frames of animation on Irma, and there we go. There's a look at our storm. Still pretty far out to sea there, but that is going to be approaching the northern, probably the Antilles Islands here first, and then approaching Puerto Rico there. So let me take a look at the chat and see what we got going on. We are going to be covering this more and more as we get closer to the event. It's still at least 5 or 6 days away from here in the U.S., but that's definitely looking like it's going to make landfall, and I've got some charts showing that. Have Robert Pleasant here, and Sue M. and Alex Front, sharp line and convection rolling through the Midwest tonight. Alex Front saying the latest weathercast showing Florida in the cone. David Moore here, keeping up on the webcast. Good to have you here. Robert Pleasant says the models agree about southern Florida, except the European model keeps going back to Myrtle Beach. That would be in South Carolina. Carl Berghoff joining us, and David Moore says we have much of the week to go before knowing what Irma will do. Hurricanes do tend to ignore the models, and we've definitely seen the flip-flopping of the models just in the past 48 hours. There's been a westward drift here. So that just kind of goes to show you don't really know what you're going to get until we're down to the 96 to 72 hour point. I got fun with tech, and Michael Burrell. Ryan Toomey says ready to go. People leaving the Florida Keys as of 12 noon. Governor Scott already declared a state of emergency, preparing and planning ahead of time. And he also says, large meeting with Broward County EOC officials Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern. Carl Berghoff mentioning Irma is a Cat 4. Any chance Irma will head to Virginia? There's definitely a chance, but we just don't know at this point. Some of the model solutions are bringing it up in that direction still. The ensembles have been all over from Carl Berghoff there. Texas rescue plan, Justin Pulliam says, may make good television, but not the ideal way to do it. Sarah Wood talking about the strong storms there in Indiana. Carl says most of the extended range does bring the remains of Irma to Wisconsin as a 970 millibar extratropical low. Yeah, most of them have been carrying the remnants inland, so that would mean flooding for parts of the Appalachians. That normally does tend to be a problem as the remnants work inland. All that considerable precipitable water. Ryan Toomey's mentioning emails, and I am very far behind on email, and I've got to work on that tonight. GFS showing another system in the Atlantic. And just going quickly through the rest of this. Few severe cells, strong winds, 60-65 mile-an-hour winds over Minnesota. And a little discussion about the Gulf, the tropics. No, the Western Gulf, we haven't covered that just yet. And Ron Chalfant seeing buffering. That could be GR level X. So let me shut that down. This is going out and grabbing like 2 or 3 megs at a time. So let's shut that down and see what the buffering does. I'm hoping we get the Patreon donations. I mean, we're so close. That's going to help solve things if we can just lay the line out here, get 10 megabits up and down, and then we can just go HD and not even worry about it. But let me bring up the card for that. Yeah, there's the Patreon donations. And all I can say is it's much appreciated. The donations are pretty much going to go right into a fund where we can get that high-speed internet out here, since we're about 15 miles out of town. And it is a contract-based service, so I have to make sure that we are solid with donations before I put all my credit online to get that done. So if any little bit you can contribute, that is very much appreciated. I'm kind of hoping we get some angel investor that can just come in here and pay the whole bill, and then we'll be set. Okay, doubtful that Irma will go up to the center of Florida from Ron Chalfant there. And, okay. So anyway, we got GR level 2 off. And let's continue with the rest of the webcast. So a lot of you have seen the forecast as far as the GFS. And I guess we can take a look at the European model first. And we have seen more of a westward drift with the models. A couple of days ago, we were looking at solutions bringing it up onto the East Coast, something like that, possibly even up to Cape Cod and Long Island. And now we're seeing a lot of the model solutions bringing it into Florida, South Carolina, and even the western parts of Florida. So the European model from this morning, you can see there's a lot more land interaction with Cuba and the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. And of course, that would definitely have an impact on the pressures. So instead of having that 882 record low, we would see higher pressures in the core. And admittedly, the GFS and ECMWF are really not that good at forecasting intensity. It doesn't have the full range of storm and sea interactions to really model that, but we have other models to take care of that. So you can see 933 millibar here on the European model, taking aim on Miami around the morning of the 10th. This is Sunday morning. And then we see it coming back out to sea on Monday, and then we see landfall around Charleston, Parris Island on Tuesday morning here, and then we just have it head inland. So that's one possible solution there, keeping it kind of on the east coast of Florida. The GFS high-resolution solution. Great. Okay, so I got to load this as a loop, so let me do that real quick. Let me see if I've got that loaded. Yeah, I've got that all set up here. Yeah, let's just look at it here. This is all ready to go. So trying to make this all fit on the screen all at once. I guess we'll do that. Yeah, here we go. So down at the bottom, there's Irma showing up just north of Cuba. Looks like the Bahamas getting a bit of a break here. And then we see landfall just north of the Florida Keys. This is going to be Sunday morning. And then we see it crossing central Florida. And that's pretty similar to what the European model was forecasting there, just a little bit further west. And then we see it just basically being ripped up due to friction in the inland areas, and then pretty much out of the picture. And then we get high pressure pretty much taken over at that point. Now another way to look at the prediction is with the, we can put everything on one chart. So there's the two deterministic models. The black is the GFS, and you can see the westerly track there through Florida. And then the red is going to be the ECMWF. And we can also put the ensemble members. This is the GFS ensembles. So we've got a little bit of clustering on the west coast here, making landfall just east of Apalachicola, coming up in the Plains, Georgia area, and then another clustering on the east coast of Florida there. So it looks like either way, this is going to have an impact on Florida with a couple of outliers. In fact, I guess just two outliers in the Bahamas. So this is actually a pretty substantial change and pretty strong grouping of those ensembles over Florida. Here's another way to look at the tracks. What I've done here is I've removed the GFS ensemble members. So we're looking at basically the core track prediction models. So there's the NavGem right there going with the southerly, most westerly track. The green there, that's going to be the official NHC forecast. So NHC going a little bit far south on this track. Then in the middle, AEMN. Hang on a second. Sorry, even I've got to look at my notes sometimes. AEMN, that's going to be the GFS ensemble mean. Then we've got the HWF right there in the center. HMON, the GFDL replacement. And then we get to the northern paths, and that would be the coamps tracks, going with the old tracks across the Bahamas there. So I guess either way, we're looking at the storm pretty much tracking somewhere between Cuba and Florida, and then after that, it's pretty much anybody's guess what we're going to see for recurvature around the Florida area. There was one panel I can show you. Hang on just a second. Yeah, this is the ECMWF. This is the European Ensemble member spread. And I believe that the black lines, it's not really well documented on here. I believe that that's the high-resolution deterministic model. And then the shading in here, that's going to be the RMS error on the, or actually that's the ensemble spread there. So we can see that there's kind of like a clustering of solutions on the East Coast, and then a few others going for kind of a more westerly track. Kind of similar to what the GFS is doing there. And then the next frame, you can see the ECMWF bringing it up the coast, and then some of the ensembles, European model, bringing it up into Florida itself. So this kind of shows you how much spread there is. A lot of doubt at this point still. Looks like they bring in another circulation out to the east, probably a new tropical storm. And that's probably going to stay pretty far out to sea. All right, let me head back to the GFS and see what we were looking at as far as those other storms. I'm going to zoom this back in a little bit. Okay, so there's the landfall of Irma. And later on, in the 300-hour point, we've got a secondary storm coming through the Bahamas around the 18th and 19th. And we see landfall in the Connecticut, Long Island, Cape Cod area. But I'm wondering if we're going to see the same pattern here of a westward progression in the track. So this is going to definitely bear watching. Could have a secondary storm coming in here several days behind Irma. And then for the Western Gulf, let's see what's going on there. We were looking for the possibility of development, and indeed we can see that around the 48 to 72 hour point down in this area right here. And looks like whatever's going on there, pretty much overcome by the strong northerly flow. I guess it just gets sheared out there. However, NHC, let me go back to the NHC graphic for that. Yeah, this is that area they're looking at here. 50% chance of cyclone formation there over the next 48 hours, and then the 5-day outlook is looking like that. So we're looking for something in the Bay of Campeche there over the next few days, and I think with that strong northerly flow, I believe the risk of that in Texas is going to be kind of minimal there. So anyway, there's the other storm that we have even further out in the Atlantic, 80% chance of cyclone formation. So we've got that labeled here as Disturbance 1, and that'll continue moving west-northwest there, 10 to 15. So we got a lot going on out there, and let me look at the chat. Very healthy powerhouse storm there, according to Ryan Toomeys. The appearance of the storm looks thermonuclear. The high-pressure ridge has forced Irma on a more west-southwest course. The other hurricane models up there with the GFS up the center of Florida. They're from Robert Pleasant. Michael Lowe says South Florida way overdue for a hurricane climatology-wise. Sue M reporting some buffering. Category 5 strength is very much possible once it hits the Gulf Stream waters. And that's a good point. I think we're going to, as this starts getting closer to the Bahamas and Cuba, we're going to start looking at some of the other products, including the ocean heat content products, and we'll start digging into relative humidity, sea surface temperatures, stuff like that. But really, at this point, I've got to reiterate, we are just fortune telling at this point. This is already as difficult enough as it is for the dynamic models. What software am I using? Depends which product you're talking about. I'm using kind of an assortment of web products here. These model panels here, these are Pivotal Weather. So you can get these at pivotalweather.com. A little discussion there in chat about preparations for Irma. And if you're in Florida, you definitely don't want to wait till the last minute to prepare. Please do that now and evacuate if you can, because the models are pretty, like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty in the long-term models, but they are bringing a lot of the tracks into Florida. Let me see if I can bring that back up here real quick. We are looking at a landfall somewhere on the East Coast there, and this is a mixture of the ensemble models, the GFS, and the European model, and we've got pretty much Florida right there in the crosshairs. So about the only thing I think that'll save us is either it's going to stay out to the east for some reason, or maybe it will continue its westward jog, but there's just no way to know, and it's kind of pointless to second guess the models at this point. Leeward Islands need to get ready. Yeah, we know that they are under the gun. Puerto Rico also looking at the storm passing right by to their north. Suim says when they had Hurricane Ike, got 9 inches of rain overnight, roads washed out. This program here, this is just a digital atmosphere map, and I've got some custom software here that did the tracks. And that's about all we know. So that's probably going to do it for tonight. I appreciate you watching the webcast, and we will check in tomorrow and see what's going on there with Irma. And we're probably not going to know for sure until about Wednesday or Thursday whether we've got a serious problem coming there in Florida. So stay tuned, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.